Hey, it's Dan from The Plague. Welcome to another episode of Hidden Gems. This is the show where we take a look at a couple of albums from the past that we feel have been kind of underrated and overlooked over the years. And this week we're going to take a look at a couple that fall a little bit outside of the metal realm. They are definitely metal adjacent. And they're both, I think, some of the more obscure albums that we've looked at so far. So I think this will be a cool introduction for a lot of people to these albums. I'm going to let Nels take it away.
All right. Yeah. It's interesting you said outside of the metal realm because I was trying to figure out exactly where this band falls. And they are Half Cocked, a Boston band. Though I think by the time they made this album, they had moved to LA. And this is their very last album and their major label debut as well, called The Last Star. And this is an album, I guess I would call it like really heavy hard rock. Almost, it's got a little bit of punk to it, but it's more like, almost like some of the earlier glam metal, that kind of stuff a little bit, but definitely a hard rock, I would say. I kind of always want to compare them to about AC/DC's level of hardness, but they're really a little bit more up tempo and kind of more in your face than that. But yeah, this I became aware of them. I think they did a number of soundtracks, and I think we got a promo back in the old days of the Dracula 2000 soundtrack or something like that, which they were on. A song from this album is on there. Sober, in fact, is the song, and I liked it, and so I picked up this album, which is on Megatronic. And yeah, it's kind of, I would say, straightforward, up-tempo, hard rock, in your face. And then it has, to me, the standout feature is the vocals of Sarah Wrightcroft. She is just a fantastic singer and really fits this style really well. I think she co-wrote all the songs, I think, and in fact, so probably wrote the lyrics. And I really like the lyrics on here. They're kind of, I want to say they're kind of edgy, kind of a little bit mean in places. Like one of my favorite songs is the very first song called "I Lied," and it starts off and it seems like it's just a love song from her about, oh, I love you, blah 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 blah. I've said all these things, and then the chorus is, of course, but I lied. There's a lot of stuff like that in here. Some fairly clever lyrics, I think. And yeah, just her performance in general is really good. The rest of the band is also really good. It's interesting. This album is fairly different from their first album, which was what they did this themselves, I believe. It's the record label is Curve of the Earth Records in Boston. So an indie label. Way more punk, I would say, way less produced and put together than this album. But this album is, it's funny when I think of how to describe it. It's way more produced. It's, a little bit more commercial. All these things sound like it's going to make this a terrible album, right? But it really works. It's like this, for me at least, this is a really, really good hard rock album. Really good lyrics. The production is just, it's not overproduced, that's for sure. It's a fairly clean recording. Everything's really loud in it. The drums are loud, the guitars are loud. The riffs are really interesting. Some of the melodies are really interesting. Yeah, and I definitely, it's an album that I remember when I first discovered it, I was like, oh my God, this is great. And I listened to it a lot, and then it kind of fades into the background for me, and I kind of rediscover it every few years, which has definitely made me want to bring it up for a Hidden Gems. For sure.
Yeah, the production, I forgot the name of the producer, but he did like a bunch of kind of industrial bands too, like Static X, and
he's done a ton of stuff. Ulrich Wild is the guy's name. Yeah, he even plays, he's a musician as well as a producer, but yeah, if you go look at his credits, it's just lots and lots of stuff. But yeah, Static X. God, there were a couple other ones that
there was a ton on. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of stuff. Very, very prolific. But yeah, my impression with this album after reading, there's not like a ton of history of these guys online.
No.
It seems like, and I'm just kind of filling in the blanks here, but it seems like, they came about in Boston in around 2000. They put out an independent record of their own. They got some notoriety from some Battle of the Bands thing that they were in for some radio station. Then they moved to LA and broke up. And it's like, it seems like that's what happened. And it seems like this album, which is called The Last Star, it seems like, I don't know, something changed here. And I don't know if it's because they were almost done and they were just kind of like, let's get this out. And so they gave someone else more control, or if it's like they made a conscious effort to strike out in a slightly new style. Whatever it is, it worked. But yeah, it's kind of sad that it seems like they came about, they got some notoriety, some success. They were on a number of soundtracks, like I mentioned, and then they just disappeared. One of the funnier soundtrack credits they have is they're on the Shrek soundtrack,
Really?
doing a cover of Bad Reputation by Joan Jett.
Wow.
But in the movie, it's the Joan Jett version that's in the movie. So there clearly was some licensing
Oh my God.
there. But yeah, I mean, I always wish this band had done more. But it seems like they only had like a 3-year or 3 or 4 year run at it.
Yeah.
Again, moving to LA just didn't. I mean, I'm totally guessing on that, but it's it's kind of classic. Move to the big city and fall apart.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I was looking at their videos, and there's one that was shot like it was like the last one they did when they're in Boston, and they're very like earthy looking and and grungy looking. And then the I Lied video, it's like it's all very, everyone's very made up, and it's very looking video, and it's like such a different thing.
That's what all the like photos in the liner and everything in here. It really reminds me of the LA glam scene a little bit, or a lot, I guess, and kind of the punk scene as well.
Right.
Another thing to mention about this is there's only like 3 or 4. Well, I don't want to say a lot of the songs on here they're remakes of other songs. They had their first album, which has at least one of the songs from here on it, but it's very different. And then there's another album that came out between these two, ironically called Sellout. Oh no, this is Sellout. What's the other one called? Oh, Occupation Rockstar. And I don't know much about that album. It seems like it's mostly different versions of the songs from here and from here. So I don't know what was going on there. But yeah, a lot of the songs on here, or at least several of them, are not. This isn't the first place they appeared, but they got really redone. They're very different.
Yeah, I found on YouTube one of the songs from that middle album. It's the very last track on it. I think it's I Lied, the arena version.
Yes, right.
It's like a 6-minute version of the song. It's got
really?
This big guitar solo section at the end. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool.
I should pick it. I should check that one out. It's funny. Earlier today, I realized I couldn't find this CD for this show, and so I was looking for it, and I was looking online, and it's actually kind of seems like it's kind of hard to find now. A little bit expensive. Oh, really? This one is a cutout right here. But it was on it. I mean, Megatronic is DreamWorks, so I mean, it's a major label.
Oh, okay. DreamWorks. I remember when that was a thing.
Yeah. This one, on the other hand, it seems just to be an indie label. Yeah, this says 1999 on it, so.
That one's probably really hard to find.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, they look more like Nirvana in all the pictures for this. And then they look more like Poison in the pictures from this, or more punk, I guess. Yeah. Really. Billy Idol.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
But yeah, for me, and it's not because the music is not good, but because the vocals are such a standout. Just her performance, I think, is really what really sells this album for me.
Yeah, I'm surprised they weren't more successful because especially that song I Lied, like it seemed like the perfect song for that time period, like that late 90s, early 2000s.
Very cynical.
Very cynical, very heavy, but also catchy. And,
Yeah.
it seems like there was a lot of bands that were being really successful at that time, that kind of
Yeah.
sound.
It's funny. When I think of this album, I think of it as being kind of poppy and catchy, but it is also pretty heavy, and most of their songs are pretty up tempo as well. So, but yeah, I don't know. I wish I knew more about the actual like what happened, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I do not. Information is somewhat scarce on them on the internet.
If any of our viewers know anything about the whereabouts and what happened to Half Cocked after this album, please drop some comments in.
Yeah, definitely. I think Sarah Wrightcroft did some like solo stuff like on Bandcamp or something like that. I remember looking once and finding some stuff, but virtually none of it is linked. Like if you go to all the usual places, it only shows this material.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know.
My memory of that album is driving around with Vico in Factoria, and he put that in, and I was like, wow, what is this? Because it was not the kind of thing he would normally listen to.
But it sounds like something he would listen to at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I thought it was really cool, but I didn't have the album, and so I never really followed up on it. And then, when you mentioned it, I went and looked it up again. I was like, oh yeah. I think when I first heard it, like I really liked the first song or two, and then the rest, when it starts getting a little bit more of the punk pop kind of stuff, I was kind of lost interest. But
yeah,
listening to it now, like I even like those songs, and there's definitely heavier songs later in the album too that
yes.
I don't think I even got to the first time around. So
yeah, no, I agree. It has a weird vibe to it that like you were saying with, it's has that punkness to it, but not like enough that I wouldn't like it, but I think enough that people that do like punk would like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like right in the middle. And just some fairly catchy lyrics. Like Gun for Hire has some really catchy lyrics on it. And Devil Shoes, you have a song called Devil Shoes, so that can't be bad.
Gun for Hire, when I listened to that again, it was like, this sounds so much like something else, and I could not place what it was. It just reminded me, and I wrote down Helmet and Stone Temple Pilots, because it's like, those are kind of what they remind me of, but it's still, I think there's a specific song by somebody from that era that
it's interesting. Really, yeah, Stone Temple Pilots, I can see that comparison.
Like their early stuff.
Yeah, right. Your classic material.
As classic as they're going to get.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was trying to even come up with other bands to compare them to, but like you said, it really is an interesting mix of they did incorporate that like LA glam sound from the 80s that a lot of bands were not doing. Like some of the other bands from like Veruca Salt or Jack Off Jill or some of these other bands from that around 2000, I think we're like they were a lot darker and just like heavier or just weirder, and they didn't have the kind of that, I don't know, it's like more rock and roll, hard rock kind of element.
Right, and that is kind of more like how I would describe their first album. It's a little bit more like that, a little more indie sounding, a little more not emo, but you know what I mean, darker, I guess would be right.
Post grunge.
Yeah, exactly. Post grunge, not as commercial. And again, it's like I don't want to say it's commercial because that sounds bad. It's like it works for this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was trying to do the same thing. It's like the other girl groups obviously come to mind, but they're not really that similar to. I mean, if you mixed the Donnas and like the early Motley Crue and a little bit of AC/DC, it might be somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It's a little far-fetched, I guess, pretty quickly.
Cool. All right. Well, we're ready to move on, I will start with mine.
Yeah.
So my choice for this week is this album here, which is Terra Firma's Harm's Way, which I also have a nice.
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
Very, very nice.
It's even got the limited number with the signatures of the band on it. So
Oh, very cool.
that was kind of cool.
Nice.
And I bought this kind of back when it came out, which I was not collecting vinyl at all then. So I'm really happy that I picked it up because I'm sure it's really hard to find.
Yeah, that's super cool.
So Terra Firma is a Swedish band. They're kind of not a super group, but like pretty much everybody in the band had been in a known band before. The vocalist Christian Linderson, who went by the name of Lord Critus on this for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
He was the singer for Count Raven on their first album. He was actually in St. Vitus briefly, and then he's been in Lord Vicar now for quite a while. So a lot of very doom metal sort of credentials there. But then Fredrik Lindgren, the guitarist, he was kind of the main guy in the band. He was in Unleashed, so classic death metal. And then Nico Elgström, the bassist, was in Entombed for quite a while, and it's actually in Entombed AD, I think, right now.
Did he go on to be in Entombed after this, or was that before?
I think it was before. I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure about the timeline. I know he's in the band now, Entombed AD,
Yeah. Right.
the offshoot band.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, they play a really interesting mix of stoner rock, doom metal, and just kind of 70s Black Sabbath sort of metal with definitely like a focus on that kind of jazzier end of the Sabbath sound, which I don't think a lot of bands have really explored enough,
Yeah, interesting.
People tend to go for like just the really heavy riffs, the kind of slow tempos and stuff. And they, I think, do a lot of like more of the unusual time signatures and just these really weird, quirky, but heavy riffs. And the other thing I really like is the drums on it are like it's a very interesting jazzy style throughout. And there's also a lot of different percussion that they use rather than just the standard drum set. The singer is definitely falls into the Ozzy vibe. And he can sing like in a totally different voice too, because he does on a couple of songs, like
that's right,
Sway, and I think there's one or two others where he sings like more in his normal voice, I think, and that's really good. He's a really good singer. And listening to like Lord Vicar or anything, like he doesn't really sound like Ozzy particularly there either, but yeah, he definitely adopts that style here, and I think they do some of that double tracking that Ozzy always did too.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that kind of lends to it as well. But
I also thought like there's some just straight guitar parts in there, fairly instrumental parts that are just like, man, did I pick up a Joe Satriani album? They're like really technical and cool, and the guy's a very accomplished guitar player for sure.
Yeah, and the album starts off with this like almost 4-minute instrumental, and it's mostly a clean like guitar kind of thing, and it's like this really noodly kind of it's almost psychedelic sort of thing.
Right.
I remember the first couple of times I listened to the album, I was kind of like, yeah, okay, this is going on a bit long, but I actually think it's a really cool way to start the album now. Like it really works for me, and it dovetails so perfectly into Groundman, the first like song with lyrics, because it just kind of peters out and then it just like hits that riff that's super heavy.
One of the songs has a nice acoustic part to it as well. That's just pretty intense and very cool, and definitely reminds me of like when Tony Iommi would occasionally do just probably a multi-tracked acoustic little intro or outro, and definitely reminds me of that.
Yeah. I think that's Have Demon Will Travel, because that's, again, another one of those, it's got a really cool transition into the next song.
Which people used to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like nowadays it's either like the songs are very compartmentalized or it's like one big
Yeah. Or your
sequence
CD
thing.
player always, when you're playing them back off MP3 or whatever, it's going to put a gap between them anyway. It's like, Jesus. It's a lost art, I tell you.
So yeah, my first exposure to this band was actually their debut album, which was just called Terra Firma. And I forgot what label it's on now, but they sent us a promo of it. And I remember being pretty blown away by it at the time because it's very similar. It's a little bit more straightforward. I don't think it's quite as varied and quite as experimental, but it's still like, there's definitely some really cool rhythms and guitar work on it as well. So yeah, when I saw this album was coming out, I actually bought it like straight away. And it's been one of my favorite albums, like ever since it came out. Like it's just one of those albums I go back to every so often. I just love it. And the very last song on it, Steel Scale, is just to me like one of the best songs of the last like 20 odd years. Cause it's just like the perfect build up. And it's just like the riffs, there's like several different riffs throughout the song and they're all like super heavy. It's got a little bit of a Soundgarden vibe almost at times.
Interesting.
The early Soundgarden.
It's funny how there is some Soundgarden that almost sounds like it could be doom metal,
Yeah, especially like Louder Than Love era.
Yeah.
The lyrics on this album, I think, are also quite interesting. They, if you just read them straight through, I don't know that they make a lot of sense. Like, I couldn't find a lot of like clear messaging throughout, but it's one of those styles of writing where it's like the phrases themselves, the way that they sound, and I don't know, the way that they're put together, I find really interesting. And Steel Scale is especially a great example of that. It's got a lot of like this kind of like Zen sort of outlook on things, but in a little bit of a cynical way too, which is kind of interesting.
That's quite a talent, for a vocalist, and I think phrasing is the right word. It's like the way that they, not just the content of the lyrics, obviously, but the delivery and the phrasing of them that goes with the phrasing of the song. That can be just as important as, obviously in metal, I think oftentimes that is just as important as what they're saying, because you can't understand what they're saying a lot of the time.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. That's an Aussie thing too. I mean, definitely the phrasing and delivery, though they had some very cool lyrics as well.
Yeah. The one thing I would probably criticize this album for is just the artwork. It's got that that era of badly photoshopped. I don't know what they were looking to do, but it just didn't really work.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd cover, and it's a negative image. It just kind of is like, what am I looking at here? Exactly.
Yeah. Which maybe that's what they were going for, but
right.
But yeah, again, this is another one of those bands that like they had these two albums and then just seemed to kind of break up, and I'm not sure why. And I don't see them mentioned a lot when people reference like the doom scene or the stoner rock scene from this era.
Yeah. What year was that one again?
I want to say it was. I want to say it was 2001 because that's when it was.
That's when it was. That's what you should want, Dan.
And the first album I think was 98, so there's actually a 3-year gap between albums, which is interesting. And I don't know if they toured a lot. It's again another band that it's hard to find a lot of information on, even though the guitarist went on to a couple other bands. He did this right afterwards, Harm's Way.
Okay, yeah.
Which is very similar, different vocalist, a little bit more of a normal singer, I guess you'd say, and a little bit more of the kind of grunge sound and mixed into it, but it's still definitely metal. And then he went from that to Atlantic Tide, which is definitely more of the stoner metal sort of vibe, but they only did a couple singles, and they still claim to be an active band, but it's been years since they've done anything. So yeah, I don't know what happened to it. I mean, besides the singer who, went on to Lord Vicar.
It's, it's interesting. bands like that and bands like Half Cocked, it's like you just want to know what happened. It's like, what went on, and you probably never will.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably just, I mean, I guess holding a band together for any length of time is probably pretty miraculous. So
Yeah, it's probably very true. I also just get this feeling that there's this scene of semi-related people that do a lot of like projects here and there, and they're always doing something. And it's like I got that impression when I looked up Terra Firma, and it's like there's so many connections and different things. It's like their band breaks up doesn't mean that they're not doing stuff anymore. They're doing as much stuff as they were doing before.
Right.
I don't know if that's distracting, from people keeping a band together, or if it helps take some of the pressure off. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, as a fan, when you find a band that you like, you want them to keep doing albums, obviously. And a lot of times when people go their separate ways and do new things, it's not the same because obviously they want to express some other thing. That's why they didn't stay together. But
right.
But then, do you want them to just stay together just for the sake of it?
Right. Well, yeah, and then like you were saying, it's like there's for me, bands like a little bit of Corrosion of Conformity, a little bit of Witchery. Some of these bands, I find them and I'm like, oh man, this is great. Then I hear that members of the bands are in different other bands doing other projects. I'm like, well, but I want more of that.
Right.
Witchery was a good example. I think they're more of a going normal band now than they used to be. I think they used to be kind of a super group, and now they're, anyway, different topic.
Yeah, COC is actually interesting because that's another band that I kind of think of when I think of Terra Firma, because it's definitely, they have a similar like heaviness and retro 70s vibe. Stoner metal, but not like totally that either.
I always think of that as kind of it's the southern NOLA metal scene,
Right.
So then you start thinking of things like Super Joint Ritual and
oh God,
yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I have, let's not talk about them. Yeah. I was trying to, when I was listening to Terra Firma, I listened to them just earlier, and I was trying to think of like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of bands in that genre, especially now. There's Sog and The Sword, and like you said, the vocalist, it's that Aussie camp, but it's a very specific, I think there's a bunch of vocalists that all sound similar to each other, and you think of them as that sounds like Aussie, but they sound more like each other to me than they do like Aussie. It's kind of a weird thing. I was just trying to think of what bands to compare them to as far as their sound, and
it's a little challenging because
it's like a little bit of Trouble, a little bit of Sog. And Sog sometimes does those sort of more mellow kind of 70s-ish sounding songs as well. There's a little bit of that in there.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I totally forgot about Sog. I think Terra Firma, the thing to me that stands out the most is just kind of this unusual time signatures and kind of that weird, quirky rhythms that they kind of build in each song. And they're very different. Like each song has a very different feel to it, which is, it's like 9 songs. It's like 42 minutes. It's like the perfect length album to me. Like it never feels like the songs, even the ones like, where there's like a lengthy instrumental passage or something, like it never feels like it's just going on or boring or anything. Like it all feels like it's necessary.
Right. It's very, it struck me as being very technical. There's some doom metal or stoner metal that isn't very technical at all. And this definitely has those elements as well, just kind of the heavy crushing riffs and that kind of stuff. But also there's just, like you were saying, the very interesting arrangements and bridges, and just the guitar parts really stood out to me. the solos, some of the instrumentals as being kind of unique and different.
Yeah, and production I think is again very minimal, but it really lends itself to the sound that they're going for. Like everything's very crisp and upfront.
Yeah. Yeah, well recorded. To me, that's good production.
Yeah.
Like, can I hear all the instruments?
Yeah.
Or is nothing buried and nothing overpowering other things?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I think that kind of wraps it up for this episode. So thanks everyone for joining. And if you have any comments about Terra Firma or Half Cocked, please leave us some comments. Give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and look forward to doing this again next month. Take care. Stay metal.
Yes. See ya.